I'm Avery Blake, at my sister's military promotion ceremony. I sat in the third row without a name card, while she gave a speech about those who walked away from the uniform. Everyone knew who she meant. But then her commanding officer walked in, spotted me, saluted, and said, "Ma'am, you're the general." The room froze. The same people who once called me a failure finally saw the one truth they never expected. If you've ever been quietly erased, until the facts spoke for you, drop a comment, like, and subscribe. Because to understand what really happened, we need to go back to the moment my mother told me. I came home on a quiet Sunday morning in late April. My uniform was still stiff from the press, collar sharp, and my new officer bar catching the light just slightly as I walked in. My name tag read Blake, A, for the first time. Dad wasn't home. Sloan was still asleep. Only my mother was in the kitchen, pouring coffee. The kitchen hadn't changed. Sunlight through the blinds, the faint scent of toast and wood polish, and that soft radio static she always forgot to turn off. I pulled out a chair, and she slid a mug in front of me. Black, no sugar, no cream, she remembered, which somehow made what came next sting more. She looked at me, eyes soft but unreadable, and said, "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, sweetheart." Her voice was calm, almost kind. Someone has to be the steady one, the support, the one who holds the line so others can rise. She said it like it was a truth, a gentle kindness I should be grateful for, like she was doing me a favor by lowering the bar before I could disappoint them. I remember nodding, because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. I don't think she meant to hurt me. At least, I've told myself that for years. But that sentence split something inside me. Clean and quiet, like a thread pulled too tight. It became the silent soundtrack of every homecoming, every holiday, every dinner table conversation where they talked about Sloane's promotions and forgot to ask me how I was sleeping after deployment. With Sloane, it was always different. She was the star. She walked the straight path, West Point honors, Army career, press-worthy achievements, and she wore it all like a second skin. My parents talked about her with pride that bordered on worship. When she visited, there were balloons at the airport. When I came back from my first deployment, I took a cab. No one even asked what country I'd been in. I never blamed Sloane. She just fit the frame they'd built. I didn't. The thing is, I didn't come home looking for approval. Not really. But I still showed up. I still sat at that kitchen table every time I could. I still listened to their stories about how proud they were of Sloane and her next big move. And every time they left me out, whether intentionally or by habit, I swallowed it, quietly. But that morning, as I stared into that cup of coffee and heard her say I wasn't meant to shine, I felt something shift. I wasn't a failure. I just hadn't been allowed to succeed on my own terms. I took a sip, didn't flinch, and stayed silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because sometimes the most powerful answer is simply remembering. People talk, families more than most, and in mine. The story was simple. Avery Blake couldn't handle West Point. She cracked under pressure. She left because it got too hard. I never corrected them. Not once. I wish I could tell you that silence was strategic. But the truth is, it was survival. Saying nothing meant I could keep what little was mine. The truth wasn't just inconvenient. It was classified. There was no ceremony, no diploma, no family photo of me throwing my cap in the air. Because the moment I was recruited, handpicked into a unit that didn't officially exist, I became invisible on purpose. I remember the night it happened. First year at the academy. I was 19. I just finished a nighttime navigation exercise and my boots were soaked through with mud. There was a man waiting in the hallway outside my barracks. No name, no insignia. He handed me a folded envelope, told me not to open it until I was alone, then walked away without another word. Inside was a directive, a new path, one I couldn't talk about to anyone, not even my parents, especially not them. I didn't drop out of West Point. I was extracted, quietly, permanently. The next time I saw my family, months later, they didn't ask why I'd left. They assumed, filled in the blanks with disappointment. At Thanksgiving, my uncle patted my shoulder and said, "Not everyone's built for it. Still proud of you for trying." I smiled and passed the stuffing. No one noticed I hadn't taken any. A few years later, I found out they'd removed me from the big family portrait, the one hanging over the fireplace at my parents' house, all of us in matching navy sweaters. I remembered standing there for that photo, squinting into the sun, arm around Sloane's shoulder. But the frame they kept it had been cropped to fit better, they said, balanced, clean. My cousin told me in passing like it was nothing. She laughed when she said, "Honestly, I didn't even realize you were missing at first." That was the point. My parents never asked. Not once. Not when I missed birthdays. Not when I sent a postcard from Maryland with no return address. Not even when I signed letters. A instead of love. Avery. Because to them, I was the one who broke the pattern, the one who stepped out of formation, and in a family built on order, precision, and discipline. Deviation doesn't get a second glance. It gets erased. They didn't know I was stationed in Ramstein, coordinating movement through the Balkans, that I learned to dismantle encrypted networks before I could legally drink, that I spent 6 months embedded in an operation so covert, it was buried under 3 layers of false mission reports. They didn't know because they never asked. Sloane, of course, was the success story. She made it easy for them. No secrets, no shadows, just a polished record and a sharp salute. They called her our golden one. I was the shadow behind the shine. But what they didn't see, what they never cared to see, was that I never wanted the spotlight. I didn't need applause. I just wanted to be allowed in the frame. Still, I kept my head down, completed assignments, led quiet victories, missed holidays, buried names, collected scars that no one would ever pin a medal to. And I let them talk. I let them tell the world I quit, because it was safer than the truth, because no one ever asked. And part of me wasn't sure they'd believe it if I told them. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't go away. It waits, patiently, until one day it walks into a room wearing ribbons no one expected, and makes silence feel very, very loud. It's a strange thing, to live a life where your name is never spoken, yet your fingerprints are on everything that matters. After West Point, my world became unlisted coordinates and encrypted messages. I was stationed in places you won't find in brochures. Cities where windows were sealed shut even in summer. Borders that didn't exist on paper but pulsed with risk under every footstep. Middle East, Eastern Europe, Northern Africa. Names change, conflicts evolve, but the job is always the same. Go in quiet, hold the line, and leave without being seen. I led teams through terrain where even the sand had memory. Designed extractions that pulled operatives out of places no one admitted they'd entered. Once, in Mosul, I rerouted an entire unit in under 6 hours when intel collapsed. In another op, classified until 5 years ago, I built a plan that got 30 Special Forces soldiers out alive after a breach turned deadly. They said it couldn't be done. They didn't know me. Then came Libya. 4 days. That's how long I spent trapped in the substructure of a hostage compound, hidden behind walls no thicker than a school book. Our comms were jammed. Food ran out by day 2. But my job wasn't survival. It was coordination, with nothing but a half-dead radio and training stitched into my bones. I redirected an aerial unit that neutralized the threat and cleared the compound. Every hostage walked out. I didn't. I was carried out on a stretcher, 2 broken ribs, 1 torn ligament, the rest, internal. Bruises that would never show up on x-rays. I spent 7 weeks in a facility outside Wiesbaden, where my file was stamped "Need to Know" and my name was swapped for a 6-digit ID. The only call I made was to a florist. Delivery for Helen Blake, peonies, her favorite, no reply. That year, I sent a Christmas card too, Maryland postmark, no return address. Inside, just 2 words still here. I never got one back, but I kept sending them, every year. Birthdays, anniversaries, the little milestones they celebrated without me. I sent cards like breadcrumbs, tiny reminders that I hadn't disappeared, no matter how hard they tried to pretend I had. Sometimes I wondered if they even opened them. Sloane was always in the spotlight. I saw her photo once on a military publication. Lieutenant Sloane Blake, rising leader of a new generation. She looked poised, commanding, everything I was taught never to be seen as. I watched her interviews in the glow of barrack televisions, heard her name mentioned in meetings I wasn't supposed to be in, and when her face showed up on a screen, I turned the volume down. I wasn't jealous. I was tired. Because I'd spent 2 decades holding lines no one would ever see, standing in shadows while others took the credit, leading missions that would never earn medals. Only silence. I never asked for recognition, but sometimes, I admit, I wished someone had just said my name out loud. The thing about being invisible is, over time, you start to believe it might be true, that maybe you were just meant to be background, the quiet daughter, the one who faded in the corner of every photo. But I wasn't gone. I was everywhere. Just not where they were looking. It was early fall when the phone rang. The kind of crisp morning where the sun lingers a little longer in the trees, pretending summer isn't quite finished. I'd just returned from a rotation overseas. The apartment was still dark. My boots were by the door, crusted with dried dust from another unnamed boarder. The number on the screen wasn't saved. I didn't need to check it. I knew that voice by heart. "Hi, Avery," my mother said. No warmth. Just recognition. "Your sister's promotion ceremony is next week, Lieutenant Colonel. It's a big deal. You should come." She paused, then added lightly, "But don't wear anything dramatic. Just something simple." "Okay, we don't want to make her uncomfortable." That was how she invited me to see the daughter they were proud of. "No, how are you?" "No, we'd love to see you. Just a reminder, don't embarrass us. Stay in the background, where you belong." I stared at the wall for a long moment before answering. "I'll be there." Not because I thought they wanted me. Not because I imagined any seat would have my name on it. I wasn't going for closure, or apology, or peace. I was going for one reason only: to be seen, to stand in the same room and let them look into my face. Older now, harder, and not waiting for anyone's permission. And realize what they'd erased all these years wasn't just a mistake, it was a miscalculation. That night, I stood in front of my closet. I hadn't worn the old dress uniform in years. It was still pressed, folded with precision, tucked in the back behind civilian blouses and field-ready gear. I ran my hand along the sleeve. 4 stripes, clean, unassuming. The kind of uniform that doesn't need to shout. I laid it in my suitcase beside a soft blouse and slacks. Something quiet, neutral, clothes for blending in, for staying invisible. The kind they always seemed to prefer me in. In the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not young anymore, but not old either. The kind of face that remembered sandstorms and sirens more than birthday cakes. Lines around the mouth, a crease between the brows, eyes that didn't flinch. I whispered to the reflection, "It's time." I didn't know what I meant. Time to forgive, time to say something, or maybe just time to stop letting silence be the only story they remembered me by. The drive to Fairview Base took 10 hours. I didn't stop except for gas. The roads were familiar, but the silence in the car felt heavier with every mile. When I finally reached the gate, the guard glanced at my ID, then waved me through without comment. No recognition, no salute. Just another vehicle headed to something ceremonial. The house hadn't changed. Same beige siding, same creaky porch swing, same flag fluttering like memory. Inside, it smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. My mother was in the dining room, arranging place cards without looking up. "Go change your shirt," she said. "You and Sloane will sit next to each other. But don't interrupt her speech tomorrow. No hug, no thank you for coming, just an instruction." Like I was back in basic. My father greeted me with a nod and a quick pat on the back. The kind officers give each other when one's just been relieved of duty. "Glad you made it," he said, eyes already drifting to the room behind me. I wasn't angry. I'd left expectations behind somewhere around the 3rd hour of the drive, but I wasn't here for closure, and I certainly wasn't here for them. I was here to remind them I never left. They just stopped looking. The strange thing about coming home is that you can walk through the same door, breathe the same air, hear the same floorboard creak under your heel, and still feel like a stranger. The Blake house hadn't changed. The porch light flickered the way it always did. The lemon cleaner clung to the walls like time hadn't moved. In the living room, A new area rug covered the hardwood, but I could still see the faint outline of the old coffee table's shadow in the grain. Some things don't leave, even when you do. But what struck me most wasn't what had stayed, it was what had been removed. Every wall in that house was a shrine. To Sloane, to my brother Nathan, to the image of a family perfectly in step. Framed photos lined the hallway. Sloane in her cadet uniform, Nathan's wedding at the chapel on base, my parents at some award dinner, proudly centered between their two younger children. I walked slowly, letting my fingers drift just above the glass frames. Not quite touching. There was a space where I used to be, a memory I could still trace. The group shot from Nathan's commissioning ceremony. I had stood between him and Sloane, arm around his shoulder, smiling into a sun too bright for comfort. But in this version, I wasn't there, cropped, clean, balanced, they probably thought. No one said it out loud. They didn't have to. I stepped into the kitchen and heard voices from the next room. A low hum of polite laughter, the clinking of wine glasses, heels on hardwood. Sloane had arrived. She entered with ease, like a debutante rehearsed for the stage. Her uniform was immaculate, medals arranged with military precision, posture so sharp it looked sculpted. She swept through the room like it owed her something. When she reached the group near the fireplace, a woman asked casually, "And who's this?" Sloane glanced toward me with a soft smile. "That's my sister," she said. "She used to be in the military for a while. Now she's doing something in admin. I think with the VA." The laugh that followed was quiet, polite, the kind that cuts deepest because no one thinks it's cruel. A cousin leaned in, voice lowered. "VA, well, better than nothing." "Right," I didn't respond. I didn't need to. There's a particular kind of dignity in silence when you know the weight of what they're ignoring. I looked across the room at the fireplace mantel. A new photo had been added. Sloane shaking hands with a brigadier general at last year's strategy summit. The same summit where I'd drafted the behind-the-scenes protocol that kept the entire operation from collapsing. But my name wasn't in the article. It never was. A little niece, maybe 6 or 7, wandered over, tugging at the hem of my sleeve. "Did you ever shoot a real gun?" she asked, eyes wide with curiosity. I crouched to her level. "Sweetheart," I said, "once I wrote a plan that helped 30 soldiers make it home alive. That's better than any shot I've ever taken." She blinked, then ran off to play with a plastic tank. Dinner was a quiet affair, just family, a few officers, and enough wine to keep the edges smooth. Sloane played the perfect host, smiling in all the right places, accepting compliments with practiced humility. At one point, someone praised her poise. She beamed and said, "I've been rehearsing my speech. I want people to understand that sometimes. When others walk away from a commitment, it doesn't mean they were right. Some of us stayed. The air shifted, just slightly." I said nothing, because the truth has a weight of its own, and sometimes, when the time is right, it knows how to speak for itself. It came near the end of dinner, right after the second round of wine had softened the room and just before dessert trays were brought out. The table was full, candlelight flickering off crystal glasses, conversations mellow and measured. Everyone had settled into that familiar rhythm families find when they're not quite relaxed, but trying to be. That's when Sloane stood up. No one asked her to. She didn't clear her throat or ask for attention. She simply rose with a glass in hand and let the room fall silent the way some people can. With presence, not volume. "I know tomorrow's the official ceremony," she began, her voice steady, warm, the kind of tone that suggests humility without surrendering authority. "But I wanted to take a moment tonight. This family has given me so much: strength, tradition, purpose. And I'm proud to be part of a legacy that values service above self." There were soft nods, a few mumbled approvals. She glanced toward our parents. My mother beamed. My father folded his arms with pride. "But," Sloane continued, and this is where the tone shifted, "service isn't always easy. Sometimes people leave when it gets hard. They walk away. They abandon the uniform and the responsibility that comes with it." The room tightened. Words like those don't float. They fall. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. "I didn't," she said, lifting her glass slightly. I stayed. And I carry that with pride. It was calculated, down to the pause, the phrasing, the angle of her chin, a perfect strike disguised as a toast. No one looked at me directly, but I felt the shift, the stiffness, the collective recalibration. They'd always believed the story, but now it was spoken aloud, given permission to solidify into something they could nod at and quietly agree with. I could have spoken then. I had every right. But I didn't. Not because I was ashamed. Not this time. I didn't speak because I knew the truth didn't need to arrive at their table in that moment. It had already entered the house. It was in the uniform folded neatly in my suitcase upstairs. In the decades of absence they never questioned. In the flowers I sent every year that went unmentioned. Sloane needed that toast. She needed to be the one who stayed. And maybe, for a long time. That's what she truly believed. But I've learned something in the silence: you can stay in the uniform and still abandon what it stands for. And you can walk away from ceremony and still carry honor in everything you do. I looked down at my plate, still half full. The silverware gleamed under the lights. But I couldn't taste anything anymore. Not bitterness, not regret, not shame, only clarity. Because for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't sitting in that chair trying to prove I belonged. I already knew I did. The hall at Fairview Base was dressed for reverence. High ceilings, brass fixtures, rows of rigid chairs arranged by rank. On the walls, flags stood like sentinels, unmoving, unbothered. This was not a room for doubt. It was a cathedral of structure, ceremony, order. Family guests were seated toward the rear. I found my place 3 rows from the back, labeled Family Unassigned. It was printed on my card like an afterthought, the kind of detail no one notices until they're the one reading it. The seat beside me was empty, the one in front of me occupied by an aunt I hadn't seen since I was 21. She didn't turn to greet me, just smoothed her dress and watched the front. Sloane stood at the podium, posture textbook perfect. Her uniform caught the light just right. She didn't glow, she gleamed. The ribbons on her chest shimmered as she spoke, each word careful, polished, precise. She spoke of leadership, of loyalty, of never backing down when it counts. And then came the turn. In any legacy, there will be those who stayed, who wore the weight of responsibility and didn't walk away. The room listened. Even the air held still. And then there are those who chose another path. And that's fine. But we know who remained faithful. She let it sit. Just long enough. She never said my name. She didn't have to. And just as the room began to absorb her message, just as her voice dipped into the final paragraph of her speech, the double doors at the back creaked open. A hush fell, not instantly, but gradually, like a tide pulling away from shore. General Carlton Hammond entered. You could feel the shift before you saw him, a subtle straightening of shoulders, a small breath held by the officer 3 seats up. Hammond didn't just command respect. He changed the temperature of a room without speaking. He moved with quiet precision down the center aisle. His eyes scanned the rows, left, then right, until they landed on me. And stopped. For a brief second, there was a pause behind his gaze. Not confusion. Recognition. Then, without hesitation, he turned sharply and approached. Every chair in my row stilled. He stopped directly beside me, raised his hand in a crisp, public salute, and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Ma'am, you're the general." The room didn't just quiet, it froze. I stood slowly and returned the salute. Not to make a scene, not to respond with triumph, but because a man who once trusted me with lives had acknowledged me in front of everyone who never had. Behind me, someone dropped a glass. The sound echoed like a rifle crack. Up front, Sloane's voice broke mid-sentence. Her hand, once confidently resting on the podium, gripped the edge. The note card she held trembled. Her spotlight dimmed, not from cruelty, but from contact with a truth more solid than her speech could bear. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply met General Hammond's eyes, a silent exchange of understanding. And in that moment, every unspoken judgment, every half-story and polite dismissal unraveled. The room had come expecting to honor one daughter. Now it wasn't sure which one. That night, After the ceremony had ended and the officers filtered out into the corridors of Fairview with their congratulations and lingering questions, I returned to the guest quarters assigned to me. A standard room, military beige walls, humming fluorescent lamp, one desk, one bed, one chair. A space built for passing through, not for being remembered. I dropped my keys on the desk and noticed something that hadn't been there before. A plain manila envelope, no name, no seal, just there, centered, deliberate, as if waiting for me to come back. Inside was a printed scan of an email, encrypted header, no sender. The subject line read, Re-Operation Echo Spark, Civilian Casualties Allegation. I kept reading. The body of the message was detailed, too detailed. It outlined a narrative suggesting I'd authorized a mission that led to unnecessary deaths, that I had deviated from protocol, that I'd buried the evidence behind redacted reports. The language was precise, accusatory. It read like someone trying to construct the fall before the trial. But what stopped me cold wasn't the accusation. It was the phrasing, because I recognized it, not just the operation, not just the dates, the wording, nearly verbatim, had come from a classified after-action report I'd once reviewed in a secure facility outside Wiesbaden. That report had only been seen by 3 people: myself, the lead analyst, and one junior officer with limited clearance, assigned to observe a single rotation. Sloan. I stared at the page for a long time, long enough for the air in the room to feel thinner than it was. My hands weren't shaking, not out of fear, but from the weight of what I already knew. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It doesn't stab. It just calculates. I found her later that evening, outside the reception hall, alone, phone in one hand, glass of white wine in the other. The buzz of celebration still murmured inside, muffled through closed doors. I didn't say hello. I held up the printout. She glanced at it, just a flicker, then blinked. Her eyes widened for half a second before settling into something flat, controlled. "Did you send this?" I asked, not loud, not angry, just asking. A long pause. Then she said it, steady, unflinching. Yes, it didn't sting the way I thought it might. Why, I asked. This time. Her voice cracked, not at the start, but on the words that followed. Because you weren't supposed to win. I stayed silent. She looked away, eyes scanning somewhere over my shoulder. Maybe the past. Maybe the version of herself that still needed me to fail. You left, she continued. You disappeared, and I stayed. I showed up. I followed the rules. I did everything right. But they still. Her breath caught. They still remembered you. She looked back at me then. I just wanted it to be my turn. There was no apology, no collapse. Just that small, desperate truth that lives under polished uniforms and picture-perfect resumes. She didn't want to destroy me. She just wanted to erase the part of me that never left. Even when I did. I let the paper fall back into the envelope. You do realize, I said gently, that leaking classified intel is a criminal offense. Her face didn't change, not really, but her shoulders lowered, like something inside her had finally acknowledged it was caught. I didn't threaten her. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked away, envelope in hand, truth in the other, and for the first time in our lives. She didn't follow. I thought the envelope was the end of it. A personal betrayal wrapped in silence, delivered without malice but not without intent. I thought exposing it, acknowledging what Sloan had done, would be the last shadow I'd have to walk through. But truth doesn't travel alone. It brings company. And this time, it brought something far more dangerous than jealousy. 3 nights after the promotion ceremony, I was jolted awake by the sound of an emergency tone, not the base's standard bugle, but the sharp, high-pitched pulse of a classified protocol alert. My phone buzzed in the dark. Red letters. No delay. High-priority intelligence breach detected. By the time I reached the command center, the walls of Fairview were already moving, officers pulling boots on, security teams rerouting comms, analysts hunched over monitors glowing with lines of code. A junior officer handed me a file, thin but heavy in implication. A classified mission file from Operation Echo Spark had been uploaded to an encrypted forum on the dark web. It wasn't just a summary, it was the real thing, the operational logs, internal communications, risk assessments with names attached, my name. The digital signature traced back to an inactive device still connected to the base system, one that used to belong to me. My first instinct was fury, the kind of cold, steady fire that lights only when someone tries to rewrite your story for you. But fury doesn't solve breaches. So I dug, with full access restored. I traced the server path backward, past the initial link, into the auto backup logs buried under layers of digital dust. What I found was subtle, sloppy, and far too familiar. The file had been retrieved by accident, because someone, recently, had accessed an outdated directory once linked to my credentials. They didn't know it triggered a dormant process, one that pulled an embedded, high-clearance file from a forgotten chain. I decrypted the timestamp metadata. The access had come 48 hours earlier, from a workstation in the comms lab, logged in under Sloane's ID. My chest went still. Not from blame, but from realization. She hadn't done this intentionally. She'd reactivated the echo of something older, something meant to sleep, a virus, a Trojan, planted not recently, but in 2017. My hands slowed over the keyboard. That year, I'd been assigned to a joint strategy group outside Mosul. We were building containment protocols for a volatile zone near the Syrian border. I'd clashed repeatedly with one man, Major Marcus Rydell. He believed in preemptive sweeps, clearing civilian zones with brute force to eliminate insurgents. I pushed back, argued for phased response, rules of engagement, morality, in places where very little remained. We fought on paper, then behind closed doors, until command chose my strategy and demoted him to support logistics. That was the last time I saw his name. Until now. I pulled his access history, and there it was, a single entry, 7 years ago, during an overnight server maintenance window. His credentials approved a system patch, minor, unnoticed, buried inside a digital time bomb. It had stayed hidden for nearly a decade, harmless, until Sloane, trying to retrieve background for her speech, stumbled into the wrong folder. Her carelessness had lit the fuse, but the fire wasn't hers, it was his. Marcus hadn't just held a grudge, he'd laid a trap, and now, because of my sister's need to one-up me, because of a mistake born from rivalry, not malice, he'd nearly succeeded in detonating the last of my credibility. I closed the file, sat back, and for the first time in this entire unraveling, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt hunted. When I submitted my report tracing the breach back to Marcus Rydell's embedded malware, I thought my role in the fallout would end there. I'd done my part. I'd exposed the sabotage. The next steps, I assumed, would be handled by Security Command or an external review board. Someone neutral, someone distant. I was wrong. General Hammond called me into his office the next morning. He didn't sit behind his desk. He stood beside the window, hands clasped behind his back, gaze steady as if the weight of the past few days had changed something even in him. "You're still technically classified reserve," he said, "and you're the only one who understands both the system and the people involved." He turned toward me. "I want you to lead the internal task force." I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to say no. Another part, the one that knew the cost of letting silence tell the story, understood why this mattered. "Who else is on the team?" I asked. He handed me the list. 3 names: William Blake, Helen Blake, Sloane Blake. It was the first time in over 20 years that my entire family was being asked to sit down together, not for dinner, not for celebration, but for accountability. The first meeting was held in a secure conference room on the east wing of Fairview Base, the kind of space where truth echoed louder than any rank on your shoulder. I walked in first. Sloane was already seated, arms crossed, eyes guarded. My mother sat beside her, flipping through a printout she clearly wasn't reading. My father stood near the projector, posture ramrod straight, as if still in uniform despite the civilian blazer. No one said hello. I opened the meeting like I would any operation briefing. "We're not here to reconcile," I said. "We're here to trace how a sabotage nearly cost this base its integrity, and to make sure it doesn't happen again." No one interrupted. Each of us had a role. My father would oversee campaign archive data. He still held restricted access from his advisory position. My mother, with her old medic background and forensic training, would assist in verifying the source device logs. Sloane would handle the systems trace from the comms lab, retracing her steps from the night she triggered the file. The irony was suffocating. The daughter they had forgotten was now leading them through the wreckage of their own blind spots. We worked in silence for hours. At first, it was stiff, mechanical, but somewhere between timestamps and metadata, between server chains and archived passwords, something began to shift, not warmth, not healing, but recognition, of patterns, of cracks, of how long we'd been operating as a broken system. My father rarely looked at me directly, but I noticed his hand pause over one of the reports when he saw the date. Echo Spark. He didn't ask, but he knew. My mother passed me a folder without a word. Inside were notes from the initial report. She had highlighted a section in pencil. A quiet act, not an apology. Something older, closer to understanding. Sloane barely spoke, but when she did, her voice didn't carry defense, only tired precision. She was no longer trying to protect herself. She was trying to face what she had helped unravel. We didn't discuss what had happened at the ceremony. We didn't mention the envelope, or the years of absence. Because this wasn't about family anymore. It was about what happens when a house builds itself on silence, then acts surprised when the walls collapse. I didn't come here to forgive them. I came here to finish what was started, and make sure the truth, this time, wasn't erased. The investigation concluded on a Wednesday morning just before dawn, when the halls of Fairview were still half lit and the air outside tasted like coming rain. We had traced the full breach, line by line. The data pointed back to the forgotten code Marcus Rydell had left buried years ago, and the single, careless access that reawakened it. Sloane submitted an addendum to the final report. In it, she accepted full responsibility for triggering the cascade, unintentionally, but undeniably. Her statement was concise, unemotional. She did not ask for understanding. She simply signed her name at the bottom and handed it to me in silence. There would be no criminal charges, no court-martial, but the consequences were real. Sloane's record was formally flagged. She would be ineligible for promotion for the next 5 years. She didn't fight it. At the final task force meeting, we sat across from each other one last time. Not as sisters, not even as soldiers, just as people who had seen too much of each other. And not enough. When the room quieted and the command representatives closed their notes, my father stood, slowly, like the weight in his spine had shifted. He looked across the table, not at my mother, not at Sloane, at me. I owe an apology to this entire team, he said. Voice steady but soft, but especially to Avery. He paused, and something in the room stilled with him. For years, he continued. I told myself that she had failed, that she'd quit, that she couldn't handle the pressure. He exhaled, the way someone does when letting go of a version of the truth they held for too long. I was wrong. No one spoke, not my mother, not Sloane. I didn't nod. I didn't rush to meet him halfway. But something shifted, not in the air, but in the architecture of what had held us apart for decades. He sat back down. I rose. There wasn't a plan to speak, but sometimes, silence opens a door you didn't expect to walk through. I've never asked for applause, I said, facing the room, and I never will. But there's something I think you should know. I let the pause breathe before continuing. During Operation Echo Spark, there was a building marked for clearance. Intel had flagged it as a hostile shelter. No civilians expected. I was on site. I had final override. I felt their attention tighten. There were children inside, 7 of them, local, not part of any intelligence file. They were playing in a basement when the scan swept through. My hands stayed folded. My voice never rose. I held the strike, overrode the order. It nearly cost me my clearance. I was placed under review for 8 months. But if I had to make that call again, I would. Without hesitation. There was a pause, not of judgment, of understanding. I met Sloane's eyes for the first time in days. She didn't look away. Then someone clapped. Just one. Slow, intentional. Others followed, not for spectacle, but for the kind of truth that doesn't wear medals. but earns respect. That day, I wasn't the shadow. I wasn't the one who left. I was the one who stayed, just not where they expected. And for the first time, they saw me for what I'd always been, not forgotten, not erased, simply undeniable. 1 month after the task force was dissolved, I sent out 3 invitations, not by email, not through military channels, handwritten, signed in blue ink, delivered quietly, one for my father, one for my mother, one for Sloane, the location the old house at Fairview. The same house where I'd once stood in a stiff collar, holding a cup of untouched coffee, listening to my mother say, "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional." This time, I arrived first. I opened the windows, let the fall air in, set the table, not for ceremony, but for something more fragile, presence. No one asked why we were gathering. They showed up anyway. My mother brought a casserole. My father carried a folded napkin in his front pocket like it was armor. Sloane came alone, hands tucked into the sleeves of a sweater that didn't quite fit her uniformed self. We sat. No small talk, no scripts, just the sound of forks against plates and memories we hadn't learned how to speak. Then I stood, and for the first time, I told them everything, not with pride, not with pain, just with truth. The missions, the choices, the months I went without sleep, the years I spent in countries that didn't have names on the map, the day I gave an order that nearly ended my career. The time I turned down a medal to protect a peace negotiation no one knew was about to fail. And the reason I never told them before, because deep down, I didn't think they'd believe me. My voice didn't break, but my mother's eyes did. Sloane stared down at her plate, then reached for my hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. My father stood and crossed the room. He picked up a framed photo from the shelf, one from a summer barbecue long ago. In it, we were all there. Except, I wasn't. He stared at it for a long moment, then said softly, "This one's missing someone." He turned to me. "We'll take a new one, all of us. This time, we get it right." I didn't smile. I nodded. Not because I had forgiven them, but because I no longer needed to be angry to feel whole. And when the shutter clicked, and I saw the flash reflect in the glass across the room, I knew I was no longer the shadow. I was the frame. If this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt erased by the very people who should have seen you first? You're not alone. And sometimes, just showing up, fully, quietly, completely, is how we reclaim the space we were never meant to lose.